Charlie, a very unique brawler, both on her basic attack, super, and even gadgets. But nowadays, even though she's not horrible, she is just not special at all. She doesn't have any sort of main gameplay style, she's just versatile, yet not good in any of the things where she's played. So how did she reach this horrible position in the meta? Today we'll take a look at Charlie's history, her release, her biggest downfall, and how she is nowadays nothing but a shadow of her past. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and let's start off with Charlie's release.
Let the carnival of carnage begin!
So, Charlie was released on the 6th of November 2023, and she had a lot of different stats. And most of those different stats were insanely stronger stats. So let's actually start with the only thing that Charlie has that's actually better right now, which is the HP. While nowadays Charlie has 7000 HP, the old days Charlie had 6600 HP. And the trade-off, it's quite insane. So let's start off with the range. The old days Charlie had 9000 of range instead of the nowadays 8.33, and because her attack it's a yo-yo, remember that you can sort of extend the value of the range, so having 2/3 of a tile extra range, it is a lot better. On top of that, because of the bonus range, her projectile speed was also 8% faster, which another really good thing. Her super costed less one hit, so you could get the super in 5 instead of 6 hits. The super lasted a goddamn 10 seconds, which it was insane. Her basic attack had double the unload speed, which meant that instead of taking 500 milliseconds at minimum to unload the attack, it only took 250 milliseconds. So you could spam the attack at close range a lot faster, really a lot faster. Her super projectile speed was way much faster, in and around the 20% faster. Her spiders lasted 10 seconds instead of 5 seconds. The spiders had 57% more HP. Her hypercharge had stronger stats, although it did took a little longer to get. And finally, the first star power dealt double the damage. Old Charlie was insanely broken. By far one of the strongest brawlers to be released. Even though 2023 had a lot of broken brawlers being released, Charlie was for sure one of the strongest of them all. So strong, in fact, that 3 days after her release, so in the 9th of November 2023, she immediately received emergency nerfs. Her super duration was brought back from 10 seconds to 7 seconds, and her first star power damage was immediately reduced from 50% of the enemy maximum HP to only 25%, which is the same as nowadays. On top of that, now enemies got cleaned when they were cocooned, so if the enemy was poisoned and they got cocooned, they would actually still receive damage of the poison, which meant that you could technically die inside the cocoon, which was kinda weird as well. On top of that, now you would keep the ammo that you have when you got cocooned instead of just straight up having one ammo, which for 90% of the brawlers, that is kind of a buff. So if a brawler got cocooned with 3 ammo, he would have his 3 ammo back, which is overall a really good thing. So, with 4 reasonable nerfs, Charlie was still the best brawler in the game. Not just good, I mean literally the best brawler in the game. And think for a second, if an enemy tries to get close to you, because of your really good super cost and unload speed, you could get your entire super in 1.25 seconds. Obviously that is in a perfect scenario, so it would most likely take an additional half a second or something like that, but you get the idea. Charlie was insanely broken. She had the range, the super, the gadget, which it was so annoying, and it was just everything just so strong. The super was unbearable still to deal with. So it was to no one's surprise that in the next month, the 12th of December 2023, she received a lot of nerfs, and I mean really a lot. Start off, her super cost was increased from 5 hits to 6 hits, which also meant that the hypercharge cost would be increased from 13 hits to 14 hits. Her basic attack unload time was increased to what it is nowadays, so it was increased from 250 milliseconds to 500 milliseconds. The super duration was reduced again from 7 seconds to 5 seconds, and the spider's HP was reduced to what it is nowadays, so in comparison to what it was originally, it was a nerf of 36.4%. So many nerfs at once, and all of these nerfs resulted in Charlie going from the best brawler in the game to a A-tier brawler, which is truly insane. So many nerfs, and she was still one of the best brawlers in the game, a top 10 for sure. And the funniest thing is that 1 month after these nerfs, she got back to the S tier because she is just versatile. At this point, she is not necessarily broken, but she is one of those brawlers that you can never really go wrong. Her very consistent attack allowed for some really good pressure, the spiders allowed for a good defense if you didn't have the super, and she had enough range to be really good in those sniper maps. And she was good pretty much everywhere. Also, keep in mind that back then, she was one of the few brawlers that to actually have a hypercharge, so a lot of the hypercharges that are really game breaking still didn't exist back then, so keep that in mind because Charlie was one of the few brawlers to have a hypercharge, which gave her a little bit of a small advantage still. Therefore, because Charlie was still so strong, in the 27th of February 2024 she'd receive one nerf and a rework to the hypercharge. So starting with the nerf, her super projectile speed was significantly reduced from 4200 to 3300, which it is the equivalent of a 21.4% nerf. And if you play Brawl Stars a fair bit, you know how impactful these projectile speed nerfs can truly be, especially such a massive one. But even though it was only to the super, most of the people already played the super at medium to close range, so this nerf didn't really change anything if I'm being honest. And then we had the hypercharge rework, so now all of the hypercharges had a fixed duration. In case you don't know, back then, if you dealt damage while hypercharged, the hypercharge duration would actually stack. So you could increase the duration of the hypercharge to like 6 seconds or something like that. And on top of that, most of the hypercharges had way much stronger stats back then. So the rework to her hypercharge was the following. The bonus damage was reduced from 30% to 25%, the speed reduced from 30% to 24%, and the shield reduced from 10% to 5%. But it had a really big buff where the charge rate was increased from 40% all the way to 60%. So instead of needing 14 hits to get the hypercharge, now it only took 10 hits to get it, which even though it's a rework, this was essentially a buff to her hypercharge. The hypercharge effect was pretty lame, just 3 bonus spiders, no big deal, but because you now had the hypercharge way much more often, you would get these buffs a lot more often and get more spiders on the field more often, and the stats were still pretty relevant. And the fact that you could no longer increase the duration of the hypercharge, it was no big deal because Charlie, even though she can get a lot of supers, she cannot cycle those supers very fast like a couple brawlers can, so this nerf didn't really affect her that much. So that's why overall the hypercharge rework was actually a buff. And because of all of these, Charlie was still very strong. The super projectile speed nerf was irrelevant, and the hypercharge rework, it only helped her, so that's why she was still a S tier brawler even after these changes. So 2 months later, in the 23rd of April 2024, she received a really big nerf. Her range would actually be reduced from 9 tiles to the nowadays 8.33 tiles, which also resulted in a projectile speed reduction by in and around 8%. But on top of that, her super cost was increased from 6 hits to 7 hits, which led to her hypercharge cost also being increased from 10 hits to 11 hits. And even with all of these nerfs, she still appeared in most of the tier lists on the S tier. And this was truly impressive, because she is weaker than the Charlie that we have nowadays. And to that, I can only answer that the meta was different back then. As I previously mentioned, the meta was just nowhere near as aggressively back then. I'm not saying that people played passively back then, but what I'm saying is that the assassins, the tanks, just didn't rush towards the enemy that much. And because the enemies could not approach Charlie as fast, that also meant that Charlie had more time in the middle range to gain the super and the hypercharge, which would then result in her getting actually aggressive with her own hypercharge. Which again, even though it was not much, the bonus damage and the bonus speed were really helpful. So, one last time, because Charlie was still very strong, she, in the 25th of June 2024, she would receive her last nerf. That her damage would be reduced from 1600 to 1520, which also led to her hypercharge cost being increased again from 11 hits to 12 hits, and the gadget duration, the spider's lifetime, would be reduced from 10 seconds to only 5 seconds. And remember that the nerf to the spiders, it's actually also a nerf to the hypercharge as well, because the hypercharge spawned spiders. And at first it seemed like everything was okay. Charlie fell a lot. She fell immediately to the B tier. The spiders were just so important, because the spiders not only provided tanking, but they also provided a lot of control, which was what you kinda played Charlie at this point. Chip the enemies at middle range or at long range if you have to, and then the super to defend yourself in case the enemies play too aggressively, if you don't have the super, and if you really have to, use the spiders. But because they nerfed the damage, the hypercharge as well, which was kinda important for Charlie to actually play aggressive, it just really hurt Charlie a lot. She was a versatile brawler, not a strong one. And this is what usually happens with versatile brawlers. They are very good because you can play them anywhere, but because they're not strong, sometimes a simple nerf can really hurt them a lot. On top of that, more hypercharges were being introduced at this point, more tanks were becoming really good, and Charlie, because of the damage nerf and the hypercharge charge rate nerf, she could no longer deal with them as well. Because of that, it really didn't take that much time for Charlie to completely fall down the meta. It was quite unplayable. You couldn't deal well with tanks because they would just rush you down. The spiders, you only had 3 of them back then because the gadgets had uses, not cooldown. So you had to be really conservative on those spiders. The hypercharge, it took quite a while to get. The super, it was also really important because if you messed up the super, you were pretty much screwed. So it was really hard to play Charlie. So it was really awful. She was probably at this time at her lowest. Because Charlie was just so strong in the previous metas, she would actually stay in this very weak form for 5 whole months. And for those 5 whole months, she was completely unplayable. It was truly a horrible time to be a Charlie main. No developments of her part, she didn't get any buff for the meantime, and it was just straight up D tier and in some cases even F tier. She was just unplayable. So, in the 14th of November 2024, she received her first ever real buff. Her damage would be increased from 1520 back to 1600, which also led to the number of hits necessary to charge the hypercharge being reduced from 12 hits to 11 hits. This was okay. She could charge the hypercharge a little bit more often, which was a decent buff. Getting a little bit more damage was just okay against tanks as well. You could deal with them a little bit better. Unfortunately, the damage didn't really change that many interactions against the lower HP brawlers, which was a bad thing. The only really solid thing about this buff is honestly the bonus charge rate to the hypercharge, because the hypercharge, it is really necessary for you to do aggressive plays with Charlie, which you still couldn't do because it was just still way too hard to play her. The problem was still there. You didn't have enough range to deal with the long range troops, they could destroy you way too easily, the gadget was drastically nerfed, the super still took ages to get, it was still very hard to play with Charlie. So, in the 10th of December 2024, they increased her HP from 6,600 to 7,000, which it only really helped her against assassins. Essentially, if you knew the interactions well, you could take a little bit of advantage of these, but in reality it really didn't change that much. You were still very vulnerable, not squishy, but vulnerable to high DPS or an assassin, for example. It was really specific, increasing her HP, and it really didn't change anything. What would kinda help Charlie would actually be in the 25th of February of 2025, the gadgets would now work on a cooldown. And this was actually kinda good because now you could use your gadget spider a lot more often, and the spiders are, as I previously mentioned, the replacement of your super when trying to protect yourself, especially if the enemy is single projectiles. And who has single projectiles? The snipers. So this actually made Charlie a little bit more versatile in open maps. Not saying that she was good or anything, but at least it was not straight up horrible. Charlie was in and around the C/D tier at this point, but still, because she didn't get any much better, like she was still pretty much useless or replaceable by a lot better brawlers, Supercell would actually give the biggest buff to Charlie yet in the 27th of March 2025, where the number of hits necessary to charge the super would be reduced from 7 to 6, which led to the hypercharge cost also being reduced from 11 hits to 10 hits. And this was actually a really good buff. And for a lot of reasons, honestly. Now, you could protect yourself a lot easily against assassins or tanks, especially tanks, and getting the hypercharge faster meant that you could play more aggressively into, I don't know, Jean, snipers, mid-range brawlers. So this actually made Charlie pretty reasonable. You could defend yourself, you could be a little bit more aggressive, you had control with your super. The problem was there was no real space for her in the meta. Whatever role she could do, there were just so many brawlers that could do it way much better. It makes sense for you to pick Charlie in ranked if you have no better options, but in ladder, why would you use Charlie if you can use Lou, for example? Or why would you use Charlie in a long-range map when you can use Carl, for example? There are just better options no matter the case. And unfortunately, Charlie would stay like this till today.
I'll come back just like a yo-yo.
Believe it or not, the title is not only clickbait. It isn't. I truly believe that Charlie got killed because of how Supercell tried to balance Charlie from the very beginning, because what was really Charlie's role? She could deliver a lot of damage up close and reasonable damage in long range. So, in a certain way, she was similar to brawlers like Shelly or Bull. Kinda. But the biggest thing was her super. The idea of her super was a stun that could be interrupted by the allies of the enemy team. Yet, Supercell not even once tried to nerf the HP of the cocoon, which is just something that I will never understood why. In my eyes, the issue with Charlie from the very beginning, when she was broken, it was the fact that there was no real reason to even try to break the cocoon, especially once the duration got nerfed to 5 seconds. It is a lot easier to just wait for the health of the cocoon to decay rather to waste your ammo on the cocoon. It is a very weird trade-off that you're doing, but that in most of scenarios it actually works in your favor very well, which destroys the whole point of Charlie's mechanic. You use your super nowadays as a very simple self-defense mechanism, or if you're feeling a little cocky, you'll use the super to play very aggressively, which I am sure that this was not how Charlie was intended to be played, and Supercell didn't thought much while nerfing her, which is why I say that they killed her. The main gimmick of Charlie, it's no longer a thing. Charlie, it's nowadays just a brawler that exists, deals reasonable and consistent damage, has a really powerful super, but because of so many nerfs, she's just no longer that special. On top of that, because of so many new flashy hypercharges, Charlie also suffers a lot nowadays because her hypercharge is just meaningless. I know I glazed a lot her hypercharge throughout the video, but the reality is the hypercharge is not that good. It helps, but it is not a good hypercharge. So, with all of these being said, what would I actually do to Charlie in my personal opinion? I would honestly just either rework her hypercharge, which I really doubt Supercell will ever do at this point, at least not anytime soon. So what I would really like would be for her unload speed to be increased, so maybe not to 150 milliseconds, but maybe to the middle term, like 375. As I said a lot of times, the problem is Charlie, it is insanely vulnerable. If she does not have the super, you can safely approach her and destroy her. Unless you're like a Watson and she has the gadget. That's like one of the few scenarios where I would say, well, maybe try not to rush her. And I actually think that would be all she really needed. Charlie, as I mentioned, she is a versatile brawler. So sometimes the smallest of buffs could really make her very broken, but right now she is very weak, so I really think that she needs some type of buff. With all this being said, hope you enjoyed today's video. If you liked, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, watch more content, and while you're doing that, join our Discord server, link in the description. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all on the next video.